Hello, everyone. This is John Bauer, and I'm here this evening for another episode of. And actually, it's not this evening as far as you're doing it, but we're recording it in the evening. Hope it'll be recorded during. You'll get to see this before Christmas because obviously this is a Christmas one because my Christmas tree is sitting in the background. But we're here for another episode of Transformation Tuesday, and I want to thank you for taking the time to pop in and listen to another story. I have enjoyed over the past several months, bringing these stories to you. It is something that I have been passionate about ever since I went through my transformation about 5-6 years ago. And it has been an absolute thrill for me this year to start doing this on a regular basis and bringing in all of these stories. And it's a great opportunity for me to learn more as well. And it's a great opportunity for you as you're watching this, that if something clicks in you, or you have questions, or anything like that you feel like maybe this is the point in time where you want to do something, please reach out. You can reach me on my Facebook page, the Bauer Power page, and we're glad to talk to you. Alex Van Houten is also available with Defining Dadbod. We are here not only to present you stories of transformations, but also to encourage those of you who are thinking about making these transformations as well. And I think that that's one of the great things is you will realize after hearing many of these stories that it is something that anyone and everyone can do if they commit themselves to it. And so with that, I want to introduce my guest for the evening. This is Austin Ameral. Austin is another example of someone who it's an interesting story, and we'll go into it, Austin. But I think what's interesting in a little bit that we've talked is, although you did have a transformation as far as body type, it's not the normal thing where everything went by the category that everybody thinks about, and that's weight. And I think that, as we go through this, it's something I really hope people glean is weight is just one factor. And there are so many factors to being healthy. There are so many factors to being fit. There are so many different ways to being fit and healthy. That I think your story is really going to shed some light on that. And again, it's one of those things that if people have questions in themselves that they can ask. But I think that that's a great thing. So Austin, I want to welcome you. I want to thank you for taking the time. Austin just told me before we got started he's had a little bit of a crazy 24 hours. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I know that
absolutely.
I know that being a dad and having a business and everything else is a full-time thing in and of itself. So for you to sit down and take the time is great. Austin, I always like to start these at the same place, and that's really going back to when you were a kid, when you were a young adult. It's always interesting to find out what kind of that family of origin had to do with the rest of your journey. So for you, as a kid, were you an athletic kid? Were you more sedentary? Nutrition an issue? What were kind of the factors that played into your fitness as far as when you were a kid and kind of a teenage years?
Sure. I think, I definitely was not the athletic type as a child. I grew up a lot of my more, 4 to 12-year-old years in the Midwest. So really hockey was a big thing. And I was always the bigger kid that played goalie. I was never the kid that went out and was, super dynamic or anything out on the sports field. Growing up, my family actually very much discouraged athleticism or organized sports in general. So it was never something that we really, or I personally ever had a big focus on growing up at all.
What was the reason for discouraging it, if that's something you want to talk about?
Yeah, so it's actually funny. I grew up in a very fundamental religion where it's like anything you did outside of the religion was a negative thing. Okay. And it's looking back at it now, it's almost like it kind of put a negative spin on fitness in general. Like, there's always those people who criticize something that they've never been able to do, or maybe they just, think it's stupid because they're afraid of it. And it's almost like having that experience growing up kind of put that shadow over physical fitness. And that was probably the first hurdle I had to get over because of what happened, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Uh-huh. And and how did you, I mean, and on the other part of it, before I ask that question, on the other part of it, nutrition and eating always play a huge role in fitness and in health.
Mhm.
What was that aspect of your childhood like?
Again, it was kind of the same thing. There was no specific emphasis put on healthy eating by my parents. My mom was overweight as when I was kind of in those formative years. So, and in the Midwest, when it's cold and winter outside, you don't go outside, you just stay inside and eat most of the time, very fatty casserole type of dishes. So there was never really any, emphasis on clean eating or healthy eating or anything like that until I kind of became a teenager myself and started focusing on it myself.
Were you overweight then as a child, or was it just that you weren't active?
It was probably a combination of both. I was maybe a little active, probably not as active as I should have been.
Hmm.
And looking back, it was a combination of also poor diet, poor eating decisions, and what I found out later in life, how it compounded with other factors that I had to deal with, which is, super high, insulin, very low sensitivity to that, huge amounts of sugar throughout the day, and all those other negative checkpoints that you can hit was kind of everything I was nailing.
Okay. And so this is in your childhood. And when in your mind or when in your life do things begin to change?
Probably the first time that I ever put any thought into, physical appearance or anything like that or health was, 15, 16. And of course it always starts with the first girl you fall in love with. You see the pretty girl and you go, man, I got to do something about myself. So you start and I started just running a little bit 3 times a week. In my neighborhood, I had a pretty decent, good little track that I could run that had uphill, downhill in it. And, I just started there. And, I had an easy bar in my house with a couple 10-pound weights. And I think the first thing I ever did at 16 was P90X, back when it was really, really cool, and that's just where I started, in my bedroom and running my neighborhood.
So with athleticism and fitness having been something that was not a big part of your childhood up to that point, was it hard for your family to adapt to this new interest that you took into it? Or was it something that they maybe saw you needed to get into that to get healthy again? What was how did the dynamic play in your family with that?
It really didn't play too far into like my own dynamic, as in with my mom and dad, just because at that point, even though I started to exercise more, I still wasn't very serious, and I definitely didn't reach any turnaround within, my body composition or
Hmm.
metabolism or anything like that. So
Hmm.
it really didn't affect them too much, because I really at that point was just dipping my toe in the water to kind of see how I felt about it. Um, and like I said before, that whole kind of dynamic was very far down on the good job list sort of
Yeah.
thing. So even if they
What?
did notice it, it wasn't something that was really paid attention to much.
Uh-huh.
And I think that is almost just as detrimental as something that is really, paid attention to and forced almost, because we all know your biggest source or your biggest chance of success is a strong support network. You got to have
Right.
that network in place. That's one of the biggest factors. So to have almost no support network was almost worse than having an overly, adapt one.
And since you didn't have that, did you find it hard in that early stage to really stay motivated, or did you feel like you had enough drive in yourself until you began to see some results, or how was that for you?
Well, I mean, it's kind of funny because it kind of died off. I kind of fell out of it, it's because I didn't have any motivation there and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know anybody who knew what to do. This was when like I said, all those kind of hip fad type, workout videos were coming out. And so all I had to really go off of was one program and what my buddy at work was telling me to do, which was just complete, bro science, which is good sometimes, but was just peanut butter and jelly before bed, and make sure you get your calorie surplus in, and carbs, 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 and knowing what I know now about how my body works, that was the worst advice I could possibly get.
And so even in that early stage of, doing fitness and trying to be more attentive to what you were eating, were you seeing any results at all, or were you still struggling?
I mean, there is a bit as far as, I mean, cardiovascular improvements, at
Mhm.
first one lap, which was maybe a half mile, had me winded, or, doing a couple curls or overhead tricep extensions, those would get me busted up the next day. But, that's pretty average with anybody. But there definitely was no large changes in my composition at all. I pretty much stayed pretty steady, the classic skinny fat,
Okay.
which is, with clothes, you look like you're super skinny on, but once you take them off, you're just flab and bones pretty much.
Huh. And and you talk about that. I mean, what were your height and weight proportions at that point in time?
At that point, I was about 5'10", 5'11". I mean, pretty much the height I am now, about 5'10" probably. And I was around 145, 150.
Okay. I mean, that doesn't seem heavy by any means.
Right, right. And it was the lean mass that was
Right.
just lacking.
Right. And
Right.
did you understand that at all? Or I mean, what was the mental part of it for you at that point, as far as any self-image or struggle at that point?
It was more so just the classic thing your parent tell you, well, your dad was really skinny too until he hit 20, 22, and then he got married and started eating and filled out, the classic, your mom made me fat excuse.
Yeah.
But that kind of was just what was in my mind. I figured, all right, well, I'll try, but this is just my body until I grow up and my hormones do what they need to do. And, I'll thicken up and get muscular and big arms like my dad and brothers. But it just was one of those things that just never quite happened. I just kind of stayed the same all the way up from that. My body type and composition stayed the same all the way up until 22, 20, 23.
Okay.
I would
Okay.
actually say 24, honestly. Yeah, closer to
Okay.
24. Yeah.
Okay. And at that point, did you, I mean, what were you doing? Were you doing something different, or were you not doing anything at all? Or what did you do at that point, and what did you decide you had to do?
You mean when I reached 24?
Yeah. Yeah. Your early
Yeah.
20s.
So when I got into those 20, 23, 24 time, I had been married by this point, kind of moving on into the more, I was in sales and just kind of living the unhealthy lifestyle that I had always had. I figure I'm skinny, I can eat whatever I want. Who cares? Sales is a very fast type of job. It was outside sales. So I was always eating out. Um, and that was right after we owned our own business, which was also very, very busy. So I was always eating out, not eating healthy food. And it just got to a point where one day, I mean, I just got up and I said, there's no way that I can be this tired in the middle of the day. There's no way that I can feel like I haven't slept at all at this age. There's no way that no matter how many hills I run or what I lift, I'm still like this. Like it's time that I get into the gym and I really try to give it a go to make myself just something that I personally can be proud of. Cause like
Okay.
at that moment, I wasn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so you started in the gym at that point?
Yeah, it's actually funny. One of my wife's pretty much family members, it was really, really good shape, probably could have competed if he wanted to in like physique. Very, very fun, nice guy. So I said, hey, how about I trade you services? I'll take care of that for you if you go ahead and, train me 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and just kind of teach me what to do. I just kind of threw myself out there. And first time we trained, we did legs, and that was a fun experience. Now that I'm into it, I understand the kind of jerk he actually is for doing that to me.
Yeah.
It's a good way to break someone in, especially when you go straight into squats and deadlifts, and then the sled, and then walking lunges. And I remember getting home. I only live about 3 minutes away from my gym, and I remember getting home, jumping out of my truck, and just going flat down to the ground. Like my legs didn't catch me. Nothing happened. I just went straight down to the ground. And I think I laid there for 5 minutes. And I was just like already coming up with excuses. Like, what can I say to not go on Friday?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
thankfully, I kind of made a commitment. I kind of forced myself into doing it before I even started. And that was probably a very good move to make, because when someone hits you that hard for the first time, it is a lot to get back.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. So you get into the gym. I mean, did things improve
Yeah.
for you at that point, or what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, finally, I had someone who's showing me like a proper hypertrophy technique. Someone who is showing me, really like, okay, eat this in the morning. Make sure you eat, within this amount of time before or after waking up. Make sure you hit these macros. I had someone actually showing me a pathway, right? One of many, but he showed me one that kind of helped me improve. Now, I improved a little bit, but I still didn't improve to the point where I am now. Obviously this is 4 years ago, but I improved a little bit, but the effort I was putting in, I wasn't getting the returns I expected still. There was still kind of something hung up that wasn't getting me quite there. I was
Uh-huh.
still doing, the bro split, Monday chest, Tuesday back, Wednesday, legs and arms and shoulders, doing that very basic kind of full 5-day split. But even at that point, I realized, okay, like I'm working very hard, but there's still something that isn't quite right, because even though I was gaining weight at that point and I could see definition, I was putting on size, my body fat percentage still wasn't dropping at all. It was holding steady. No matter how much lean mass I put on, it was flatlining the whole time. So I knew that there was still something else that wasn't quite right.
And you mentioned early on, I think you mentioned early on your body fat. What the first time that you checked your body fat, what was it at?
Yeah, so the first time I checked it was there at, I mean, to be fair, as a Canada machine or a Tanita machine,
Sure.
a couple of years ago, it probably isn't the most accurate thing, but it's, within 5 points. But I jumped on there and it came back, I think I was 160 and 32%, 32 or 33% body fat.
See, that absolutely fascinates me because, I
Mm.
mean, when you talk about weights like 145 and 160, I mean, that absolutely fascinates me that you could have that high of a body fat percentage at that weight.
And I
Um,
think it was definitely, I mean, I'm thinking I carried an excess of visceral fat,
okay,
as well as just, your superficial stuff.
okay,
That's my main guess, because it was mostly concentrated on my trunk. It was still higher in, my extremities as well, but it definitely wasn't as high as in my trunk, my gut type of
uh-huh.
area. Um, so I think that's why I was able to be so high. I mean, that's my guess, but also, that machine may have been off by a couple points. So worst case
Sure,
scenario, I'm still at 28%,
sure, but
which,
yeah, still, I mean, still that's
yeah,
really high. I
yeah,
mean, we talk about those percentages, and just to kind of give context for people who may be listening, um, when you get into the 20s and the 30s, those are really, those are the body fat percentages that you're talking about, obese or morbidly obese. I mean, those are what you think of it at that level. So, I mean, that's what's just absolutely fascinating is that at 165, um, and so to you, I mean, and kind of jumping ahead in your story a little bit, you're a personal trainer,
yes.
you're working at a gym. We can all tell that. I mean, what does that say though to you and how is that experience? How do you relate that to clients? I mean, because you have people
Mm,
who come in and you're going to have somebody who's got that awful high body fat percentage, and it's going to. I mean, from everything they hear and everything they read, that's going to devastate them.
yeah,
How do
well,
you deal with that? And we might be
it's,
jumping ahead, but I think it's
yeah.
important to cover right here.
I think though the best way to look at it is what I tell people is everyone has different struggles to hit. You can be that super, super, super lean person who just can't put on mass for anything, and that's a struggle. You can be that heavier person with the really high body fat who has to lose a bunch of weight. But
Hmm.
what it comes down to is just finding something simple that works for you, that you can hit and stay consistent with. And no matter what your struggle is, no matter what angle you're coming from, as long as you find that consistency and that effort that is worth it for you, then you'll hit your goal. And what I, honestly, the bigger people, the people who have more weight also have more lean mass because they need it to move around,
Right.
so I focus on that, hit the weights, keep your lean mass up. Lean mass is the enemy of body fat. So keep going as hard as you can, and you'll see that come down, and just realize that you are already in one category ahead of a lot of people because you've got that lean mass. You've got the strong legs, you've got the strong calves. So use those to your advantage, and just and realize what your strong points are, what your tools are. And if you can put those in your back pocket and focus on those, the rest will work along for you, no problem.
That, and I got to tell you, and I'm jumping off on tangents here and there, but I got to tell you, that's a very encouraging thing to me, because I've always been big. I'm never going to look like you. I've always been bigger. And I mean, before it was bigger with fat, now it's bigger with muscle. And I think that's a really encouraging thing to hear, is even as I'm a bigger person, that I've got to remember that part of that bigness, for lack of a better word, is muscle.
Let's call it volume.
It's volume. It really is.
Yeah.
Part of that volume is muscle. And I mean, I go into the gym, I lift heavy stuff, and that's kind of the joke about lifting is, guys go into the gym, they lift heavy stuff and they drop heavy stuff. And I do that. And I think that it's interesting and good to remember, and I'm telling this to myself more than anybody, is just that whole thing of, I may weigh more, but that's still that a large part of that volume, when I can go in and deadlift 375, a large part of that volume is lean muscle mass, and just to keep going and pursuing that. So you've encouraged me. Now we can just now we can talk about everybody else. But I mean, it's just I appreciate hearing that. It's a great thing to think of, and it's a great thing for a lot of people to think of, is just that it is that way. So going back to the point where you get your high body fat percentage, you're still only 160. You're not making a lot of progress. You said you're making a little bit of progress, a little bit of definition, but it's one of those things that sounds like that the outcome wasn't matching up with what the work you were putting in, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Work versus pay definitely wasn't there. And it wasn't until I probably stayed in that lane for probably a good 1.5 to 2 years of just busting my butt, working as hard as I can, kind of bouncing around from diet to diet, taking different people's ideas on macro splits and all of that, and just testing everything out and not really getting anywhere until about, like I said, 1.5 to 2 years after that I actually found out that I had, a hormone kind of imbalance. I wouldn't say disorder, but it was definitely an imbalance, because my body through therapy was able to fix it on its own.
Okay.
But I would definitely say that was the key. Absolutely. I mean, from how much effort I was putting in and how little I was getting paid out, to versus understanding what my body imbalances were and fixing those. And then all of a sudden putting in the same amount of effort and getting huge rewards for it, at least at first, right? Because once my body figured out what was wrong with it, it was like, now we can work, right? Of course. So, huge gains. And then after that, just having to, consciously pick it away and fine tune it until I got to where I am now.
And I want to go back to something you said, until you figured out your hormones were out of balance.
Yeah.
One does just not figure that out. I mean,
No.
How did that come about, that you even went down that road as far as discovering that?
So it was actually all by chance. My wife and I were having our first child, and we were having a few issues in the beginning. So we were both going through a bunch of tests.
Okay.
And I just happened to find out about this issue, right? Which happened to not be related, but it kind of worked everything out to the point where my doctor was like, "Hey, did you know about this?" I was like, "No, but shoot, does it make a lot of sense now?" And at that point, I really hadn't had too much knowledge on, my endocrine system, or, how testosterone affects insulin, or any of those other things. And it was at that point that I actually really started studying my endocrine system, which led to a bunch of other studies in physiology, which eventually led to me becoming a personal trainer.
Okay. let's stop here and let's geek out for a few minutes, because I do want to go,
Absolutely.
I want to geek out, and I want to go into this a little bit, because I think this is important, because this is something that we have talked about on Defining Dad Bod from time to time. It's definitely something that really is real. It's not some pie in the sky weird kind of science thing. This kind of stuff is legit, and I think when you come across people who have gone through it, you need to talk about it.
Yeah,
Go through,
absolutely.
if you will, thoroughly, but clueless enough so that I can understand it, because I don't like math, I don't like science. So just
Okay.
pretend I'm your target audience here.
All right.
If I can understand it, everybody else will understand it.
Don't worry about the math part. I'm a personal trainer. I only count to 10 or 12. So anything past that is beyond me too.
Yeah. Any weight over that, you've got an app to figure out what plates you need.
100.
So
I'm sure there's one for it. Yeah.
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 Okay. Go ahead.
So pretty much I talked to my doctor first. He says these are the issues. You're a little imbalanced. Instead of going any sort of the anabolics route, as far as like the creams or the gels or anything like that, I elected to do it naturally by eating food that naturally boosts your testosterone.
Okay.
And
So
I
your
believe,
testosterone was low. Is that
yeah. So and testosterone was low. I mean, it was enough low that it was a red flag. Actually, it's kind of funny now that I've been looking into it. Men's testosterone has been dropping like crazy since the 60s. Just as far as their natural levels, a young man my age should have been average between 600, and some people are all the way up to 1,000 naturally.
Okay.
So there's a huge swing in what's acceptable.
Right.
Now I was around 400.
Okay.
So that just because of my age and everything else, and the fact that my insurance would cover it, the doctor was like, hey, do you want to fix this? And I said, sure. So we went through and I did a couple therapies just to get my levels back up to where they should have been naturally, which was about 600. And then after that, I just focused on foods that, increase, magnesium, potassium, manganese, all that stuff, that kale, all the foods that naturally help boost your metabolism testosterone in the first place. I'm thinking about ahead how my testosterone affected my metabolism.
Right.
But,
and just so people know, you mentioned kale. What else out there are foods that you're talking about that are boosting testosterone?
There's a whole bunch of compounds out there that are natural test boosters that are just like one that I really like. I mean, fish oil was really good. The omega-3s from it. I noticed a difference there. And I just really focused on upping all my phytonutrients, because what's a
phytonutrient? I'm going to stop you every chance I can.
Okay, so it's just a nutrient that's broken down, that's building blocks of other vitamins and minerals and other things like that. So you can take like trace minerals and just make like, which are liquid, just droplets that you put in water, or they're tablets too. But what I just focused on mainly was just getting in all my vegetables, all my daily recommendations of everything. And I went from there, and I looked up foods, honestly, off the top of my head, I couldn't even remember now, but I looked up everything that I needed to eat, and I just focused my diet on that. And then also the therapies really, really, really helped. I've got to say, TRT, or testosterone replacement therapy, it's so important, because I think so many people nowadays, especially like I was saying about men, how their testosterone's dropping below average, below what their body needs to, just function correctly. It's super important that, because I think there is a stigma a little bit with guys around it, because people,
absolutely.
People will say, oh man, you're taking this, you're using that gel, like, oh, you're on steroids, right? Like they think, your testosterone is going to jump to 1,800.
Well, either that, or there's just the stigma of a guy having low testosterone.
Right. Yeah. And,
I mean,
and unfortunately,
the locker room joking about that is going to be enough of a stigma that, can potentially, prevent guys from doing what they need to do to boost this. So, I mean, you put those two things together, it's a big deal. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, lower testosterone in men, it promotes hold on, I'm going to get it. Testosterone insensitivity, right? So
Okay.
resistancy. There you go. Resistance, insulin resistancy. Geez, like I said, been a crazy last 24 hours.
Sure.
But that having low testosterone affects your metabolism in so many ways. You know, if you can't build lean muscle, if you don't have the testosterone to go into, you know, an anabolic state when you're resting, then there's no place for the nutrients to go. There's no place for it to build other than in your adipose tissue, other than in your fat tissue, you know, and beyond that, then you develop metabolic syndrome. So metabolic syndrome is the underlying, you know, deficiency that leads off to diabetes and heart attacks and strokes and all these other issues down the road.
Uh-huh. So you find this out kind of by chance with some other stuff that you're dealing with starting a family, and you switch it. So how does this all play out in real time? I mean, you're going through this TRT, the restorative therapy. You're focusing on nutrition as far as hitting these things that are going to boost your testosterone. How does this play out in the gym? How does this play out with fitness? How does this play out with body composition?
Well, it definitely improves, definitely helps a lot. I mean, all of a sudden I start to put on mass, I start to put on weight. I go from 160, 165 to 185 in a matter of a year.
Okay.
195 at one point. At my heaviest, I was 215. So, I mean, it definitely allowed me to start putting on mass, not all of it cleanly, you know, definitely. I started to put on a lot of body fat as well, because I entered this mindset of like, oh my gosh, now I can build muscle. Because at that point, I was still kind of uneducated on the nutrition side. So
Right.
I finally figured out what was going on with my body, but I entered that, you know, dirty bulking cliche of eating whatever I could eat, trying to lift as heavy as I could and just see what would happen. So it definitely played into me gaining lean mass for sure. But even though I gained the lean mass, I still put on some weight of, you know, dirty weight along with that lean weight.
Okay. Okay. And so,
Oh, and one thing I want to point out before we
yeah,
forget, before we
please.
get too far away from
No,
it,
go.
is I think personally, because no one else in my family has a history of hormone issues or testosterone issues or anything like that. So I personally, I attribute it to the fact that when I was first starting and I was first working out, you know, 17, 18 years old, I took a T booster,
Okay.
and I definitely speak out against them now. You know, testosterone boosters, like, I'm, no brand in, particular, but all of them universally, especially for someone who is a young kid. So, I mean, if you're anyone out there's listening to this who's under the age of 25, or really anyone at all, under the age of 40, 50, like there's no reason to mess around with them. Let your body do what it's going to do, because I perfectly and 100% attribute it to me messing with my testosterone levels when I was younger and trying to artificially boost them with Lord knows what's in those,
Yeah.
to really messing up my endocrine system as it progressed and as I matured.
Okay.
Yeah, so just
Yeah,
wanted to throw that out there.
and I think that's important when you're doing something in the industry that we're in, whether it's full time like you or part time like me, that you are advocating against that kind of stuff, and I think that's so important, especially like you said for teenagers, and I think that goes back to the whole thing we were talking about. There's such a stigma attached that you feel like you've got to do something, that you'll do anything. And, when you're
Yeah.
17 or 18, you'll do anything. And you talk about losing weight for the girls. You'll do
Mhm.
anything to gain the muscle too.
Oh
And
yeah, absolutely.
it's diving in head first into who knows what. So yeah, I think that's really important. I appreciate you bringing that up, because I do think that's an important factor. So we get what we have in front of us today, which is fantastic. And I mean, obviously you put in a lot of work and a lot of effort, and it's paid off. And again, I think it's really interesting. You talk about your weight, you get up to 215. What's your body fat when you're at 215?
It's hovering around 23,
Okay.
22, 23.
Okay.
So, and because, like I said, that's 5 points off in either direction, who
Sure.
knows where it really was.
Yeah.
But as far as my marker, from whether it was right or wrong, I had my test marker, which was 135-ish.
Yeah.
So I was able to, put on weight, but lose body fat. So I knew that was lean mass at that point.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think it just goes back to the whole thing we were talking about is, all of these numbers can be very confusing to the everyday people when they hear about it. You've got somebody who's 165 and in the mid 30 in the low 30s body fat. You got somebody who's 215 and they're 10 to 15 points below what they were above. And I think that that's so important, as we get into culture and we compare numbers and we compare weight and we compare body fat. You got to keep perspective on that. I think that's
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's something that's really important is keeping perspective on it. So after all of this, you were able to pretty much regulate everything, I guess, at this point, once you got through
Yeah.
and got everything under control. Do you do anything now to maintain that testosterone? I mean, obviously you probably have it checked when you go to your physical every year. Everybody does, I think. But I'm just curious whether even at this point, I presume your numbers are relatively normal. Do you do anything particular throughout your year nutrition wise or anything like that to maintain that? Or is it something that you think is pretty naturally okay at this point?
I definitely keep an eye on it. I still get my blood tested, every now and again, and I get my biomarkers and everything checked just to see where my cholesterol's at and how it's working together with my testosterone and where my insulin, my sensitivity, how that's going and everything like that, just to keep an idea on everything. So, and now it's kind of my passion. I'm kind of geeky out on it. I like it. I have fun checking it. My wife says, I might as well be a diabetic because I have my glucose meter out on the counter and everything. So but for the main part, I just, at one point I went kind of ketogenic. So just to, explain why I'm so into all these areas now is when I was at my 215, that was when I got certified. So I actually was kind of at my peak weight when I discovered that I really had a passion for it and I really loved it. And people were asking me because my composition had changed so much, but I was still in that same sort of boat of being not skinny fat, but now I was like buff fat. So like my shoulders arms looked good. People could tell I was working out, but if I took my shirt off, I still had the belly, So, at that point I got certified and I said, okay, I got to take, obviously nutrition is the next step. I got more educated on nutrition and I started focusing on it more and more and learning more and more about it, kind of above and beyond your average personal trainer, but definitely not up to a dietitian. I'm somewhere in the middle there. And just learning about it and working on it. And at that point is when I, kind of started to get on the carbs are the devil train and worked through it and kind of just cut carbs slowly and progressively and just upped my cardio and got strict about my diet and nutrition. And the weight came off in a matter of 6 months.
Wow. That's fantastic. Yeah. And at that was the point you got certified. And what are you doing now with that?
So now I work out of a gym, personal training. I do group classes and then also I do personals, your average hour sessions, 3-4 times a week, that sort of thing. And I really enjoy it. I love it. And my main thing is kind of pushing that it's not so much about what you choose. We're in the area of fad diets and if you're not on keto then you're ridiculous, and if you're not on Atkins and you don't know what you're talking about, all these different avenues you can take. And at the end of the day, I want to get the message out there that no matter which you choose, it's about locking in, staying consistent, picking something that you can stick with and getting the work done. Because honestly, there's all diets work. Maybe not all diets work for everyone, but it's finding that thing that works for you and sticking to it.
Right. Fascinating story. I'm absolutely, it's very interesting to talk with somebody who did go through the fitness perspective a little bit differently than a lot of people, whether it was a little bit of lean to mass, but there was a lot more to it. Let me ask you this, and this is one thing we really haven't talked about at all. I mean, we've talked a lot about your history. We've talked a lot about your professional life. How does this all play into being a dad? Because I mean, really, we're talking about defining dad bod here, and how does all of this change and all of these adjustments in your life? How does that play into being a dad?
I mean, it definitely is a lot harder, I'd say, for a father or a mother or parent in general to reach goals when you have a family. You know, I think that has to go along with anything. Children are a blessing, but they also require a lot of your time and a lot of your attention. So, you know, I think it's a great motivator. Absolutely. My children have become kind of my motivator and my inspiration to keep going and keep staying healthy. But they can also be a deterrent sometimes, and can also, you know, you're meal prepping Sunday at 3, but they don't want to take a nap. So now you've got a meal prep Sunday at 9 when they go to bed.
Wait till they don't take a nap at all. I'm just gonna tell you that
No.
day's coming. There's no naps.
Oh no, I'll sneak Benadryl into their yogurt.
By that point, though, they can help you meal prep. That's
yeah.
That's the trade-off. Is once they don't take naps, they can help you meal prep.
Yeah.
Giving you a hard time,
well,
but yeah.
You just gave me a lot more to think about. But no, they, you know, so it's kind of one of those things where it does make it more difficult, but it also makes it more rewarding at the end of the day as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We're coming to the end of the show, which is really good because I think your camera just went out, and
Oh, no.
and just and kind of bring everybody up to speed. One of the things that happened in the last 24 hours for you was you had your phone with you during a session, and it was being used by a 50-pound kettlebell for a placemat. Is basically what it sounds like happened. So you got it repaired, and you might need to take it back and have them check a few things because I'm not sure it's.
Yeah, I don't know if they deserve that Yelp review now that I left them, because might have to go back and edit that.
You might have to go back and edit that Yelp review. Anything else that you want to share with everybody? I mean, based on your experience, going through what you went through, like I said, a very different avenue and a very different idea of fitness. Any parting words that you would want to share with anybody?
It would definitely be that everyone has to face different struggles. Everyone has a different level or different hill to climb that's steeped or, you know, slippery or rocky. You know, everyone has different hardships in front of them. Mm-hmm. What's really important is just finding your angle and working at it, working with your strengths. And I think people get too caught up on, oh, well, it worked for my brother or it worked for my friend, but it isn't working for me, so it must be me. You know, I want people to see that it's about finding what works for you, and you might have to work harder than somebody else. You might have to work harder than your cousin or your friend, or if you find the right thing, it might be easier for you. So I think at the end of the day, it's all about just working until you find that thing. Just find whatever works for you and keep doing it until you reach your goal. And your inspiration. You know, it's great to have motivation. You know, you see your best friend working out, and that's a good motivator. But until you find that thing that will intrinsically motivate you, you know, that will really inspire you, like kids can be great for, you might not make it. But once you find that thing that lights that fire inside you, then you'll be good to go.
Yeah, great advice. And I think another thing that's really important as anybody is walking through this, if at all possible, that they're not afraid to reach out to somebody who can help them and give them information. Because I mean, your story is an incredibly intricate and technical one, and a lot of times it takes people who have that technical knowledge and that intricate knowledge to really walk through it with people. So
don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask somebody. Like, I know that was my thing in the beginning. I drive up to the gym, and if there were people there, I turn around and go home.
Correct.
You know, so don't be afraid to ask someone because you think they're stronger than you or they know more than you, because that's how you're going to get better. That's how you're going to gain knowledge, is by reaching out to those people and asking for help.
Yeah. And I mean, this is a perfect example. You and I are both people who have gone through it. We've gone through different avenues and different paths, and we've learned a lot on the way. And now part of what we do is kind of share that. So I think that that's the great thing is there are so many who have gone through this, that want to share the information and encourage others on doing it. Thank you, Austin, so much. This has been
Absolutely.
absolutely fascinating. It's been a little on the techno geeky side, but that's okay. I think that it's good to hear that because, like I said, I think there are people out there who may wonder why they're stuck where they're at, and it's sometimes not as easy as dropping the carbs and hitting the gym 3 more times a week. There's
Hmm.
more to it sometimes than that. So I think that's an important story to hear. So thanks a lot for your time. Thanks for the story. I appreciate it. It has been absolutely fascinating to listen to you on it. And like I said, if there are people out there watching that are looking for information, that are looking for guidance, please feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on my business page, Bauer Power Fitness Consulting. You can also find Alex Van Houten on Defining Dadbod. We are 2 guys who love this stuff. It's a passion of ours. It's something that has made our lives better, and hopefully we can make lives better for others as well. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great evening.